Uh, geez, that could have gone better. Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a great/wonderful day, and I hope everything's going good, great, in your way. Today is Kansas Day. My favorite state, my favorite place to be, my home. So I thought, why the heck not for today? Do the history of Kansas. I'm gonna try doing my best here. I'm not gonna lie. We have a lot of Native American Indian tribes that I am probably going to butcher saying. Wish me the best of luck, but let's hop in and not waste any time because I am excited to talk about my favorite place, Kansas. Alright, there's a lot of history from the beginning. I did my best. Let's start from the top. The Paleo-Indians, an archaic peoples around 7000 BC, Paleolithic descendants of Asian immigrants into North America, had reached Kansas. And once in Kansas, the indigenous ancestors never abandoned it. Although this was before Kansas was Kansas, we're dealing with mammoths and shite here. These bands of newcomers encountered many different animals, such as mammoths, camels, ground sloths, and horses. The sophisticated big game hunters did not keep a balance, however, resulting in a Pleistocene overkill. If you hear this in the audio, these words are weird. After the disappearance of big game hunters, some archaic groups survived by becoming generalists rather than specialists, foraging in seasonal movements across the plains. The groups, however, did not abandon hunting altogether, but also consumed wild plant foods and small game. Their tools became more varied, with grinding and chopping implements becoming more common. Also, pottery-making societies did emerge. And before I move on, I just want to simply state that Kansas had mammoths. In your face, Florida! Etzanoa is an ancient city founded by the Wichita people in about 1450, meaning we basically time skipped a lot right now. If you're curious about present-day Etzanoa, it's located in Arkansas City, Kansas, near the Arkansas River. I really hate that after knowing I know how to pronounce Arkansas, I keep trying to say Arkansas, and it's not the right damn term. Wake the feck up me. In 1601, Lanier Onyate visited the city of Etzanoa. Onyate and other explorers who accompanied him called the city the Great Settlement. And at the time, Onyate and his expedition found and explored the city. If anybody is curious, Etzanoa may have been home to about 20,000 people at the time. In 1541, we just went back a bit, Francisco Vasquez de Coronado, the Spanish conquistador, visited Kansas, allegedly turning back near Coronado Heights in present-day Lynchburg, near the Great Bend of the Arkansas River, in a place he called Curiva. He met the ancestors of the Wichita people. I just looked it up, it's Quivira. Near the Smoky Hill River, he met the Hardy, who were probably the ancestors of the Pawnee. This was, however, also the first time that the Plain Indians had seen horses. And later they acquired horses from the Spanish and radically altered their lifestyle and range. I don't know what it was before, but they decided to go like, ooh, horse, must change. Following this transformation, the Kansas, sometimes Kaw, an Osage nation, originally Uaash, forgive me if I mispronounced this, I looked it up and I could not find anything, arrived in Kansas in the 17th century. By the end of the 18th century, these two tribes were dominant in the eastern part of the future state. The Kansa on the Kansas River to the north, and the Osage on the Arkansas River to the south. At the same time, the Pawnee, sometimes Panisa, again, forgive me if it's not pronounced correctly, I looked these up, sites suck for not helping me pronounce stuff, were quite dominant on the plains to the west and north of the Kansa and the Osage nations, mainly to massive herds of bison. Europeans later visited the northern Pawnee in 1719, and in 1720, the Spanish militaries Sir, forgive me if I mispronounce that. I keep looking these up, and every site I keep doing, or going to, doesn't give me the pronunciation. Expedition was wiped out by Pawnee and Otoe warriors near present-day Columbus, Nebraska, effectively ending Spanish expeditions to the region. Am I the only one who keeps finding this ironic that present-day stuff that's supposed to be in Kansas is later outside of Kansas? Is that just me? Oh, by the way, if you're curious why Europeans were there, they basically wanted to have a piece of land to be marked down in history. That was basically it. Something for history, anyway. For those who don't know much about the Louisiana Purchase, apart from the brief explorations in Kansas, neither France nor Spain had any settlements or military or other activity in the said state. And in 1763, following the 7 Years' War in which Great Britain defeated France, Spain acquired the French's claims west of the Mississippi River. It returned this territory to France in 1803, keeping the title of about 7,500 square miles, which is 19,000 kilometers squared. In the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, the United States acquired all of the French claims west of the Mississippi River. The area of Kansas was unorganized territory. Then later, in 1819, the United States confirmed Spanish rights to the 7,500 square miles as part of the Adams-Onis Treaty with Spain. That area became part of Mexico, which was also ignored. And after the Mexican-American War, and the U.S. winning it, the United States took over that part in 1848. The Lewis and Clark expedition left St. Louis on a mission to explore the Louisiana Purchase all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And in 1804, Lewis and Clark camped for 3 days at the confluence of the Kansas and Missouri rivers in what today is known as Kansas City, Kansas. During their travels, they met French fur traders and mapped the area. And in 1806, Zebulon Pike passed through Kansas and labeled it the Great American Desert on his maps, which is very ironic because it is if Kansas is a desert, then Arizona is a wetland. Let's just put it like that. From June 4th, 1812 until August 10th, 1821, the area that would become Kansas Territory 33 years later was part of the Missouri Territory. Before we do continue, Kansas had never had any slaves previously before it was even a state. Any slavery that has been done was previously claimed as Missouri Territory, and I did look it up. The number of slaves in Kansas Territory was estimated at 200. Basically the mix between men, women, and children and all that jazz. But as you can tell, free slave people did not want any slavery in their place. However, from Missouri, they did give us Fort Leavenworth, which basically contained a lot of white settlers. The fort was established in 1827 by Henry Leavenworth, what are the odds, with the 3rd U.S. Infantry from St. Louis, Missouri. European settlers also did live there too, but aside from such, it was basically a trading post to mainly protect people from the Native American tribes that attacked traders along the route of the Santa Fe Trail. Past that time was the 1820s and 1840s Indian Territory. Beginning in 1820, the area that would become Kansas was set aside as Indian Territory by the U.S. government and was closed to settlements by whites. The government then resettled to Indian Territory, now part of Oklahoma, those Native American tribes based in eastern Kansas, principally the Kansas and Osage, opening land to move eastern tribes into the area. Basically, throughout the entire treaty, dated by June 3rd, 1825, 20 million acres of land was ceded by the Kansas Nation to the United States, and the Kansas tribe was limited to a specific reservation in northeast Kansas. And in the same month, the Osage Nation was limited to a reservation in southeast Kansas. Just sitting down and listening to him going like, oh man, this land is wonderful. I sure hope the white man does not ruin it anymore. After this point, the Indian Removal Act of 1830 expedited the process. By treaty date, August 30th, 1831, the Ottawa ceded land to the United States and moved to a small reservation on the Kansas River and its branches. The treaty was ratified April 6, 1832, And within a couple months later, more tribes were starting to move in. The Kickapoos, the Pekinishaw, the Wee, all agreed to occupy 250 sections of land bounded on the north by the Shawanoe, east by the western boundary line of Missouri, and west by the Kasakia and the Peoria peoples. Basically, as time went on, more Indians or Native Americans started to lose their land, move into the Kansas area territory, and then later at that time, basically lost all the land, and most having to convert into being more Americanized. And if you're curious what that means, basically, be more white, forget your history. A dark time it was. Definitely a dark time. Despite the treaties establishing Native American ownership in parts of Kansas, by 1850 European Americans were illegally squatting on their land and clamoring for the entire area to be open for settlement. A lot of certain things passed through times, but the events that were soon to come were basically several U.S. Army forts, including Fort Riley, were soon established deep in Indian territory to guard travelers on various western trails. And as time did go on, so did updating territories. Mainly because the South and North were trying to keep peace at one another, they decided to up the ante a bit on what land was considered what. Congress had already begun the process of creating Kansas Territory in 1852. That year, petitions were presented at the first session of the 32nd Congress for a territory organization of the region, anyway, lying west of Missouri and Iowa. At the time, no action was taken, but later a representative from Missouri submitted to the House a bill organizing the territory of Plate. All the tract lying west to the Rocky Mountains, the bill was referred to the United States House Committee on Territories and passed by the full U.S. House of Representatives on February 10, 1853. However, Southern senators stalled the progression for the bill, basically giving implications of the bill on slavery and Missouri's compromise were debated, which is ironic, considering Missouri is a slave state. Either way, with that whole quandary, they decided to make the Nebraska-Kansas Territory Act. I could continue more upon this, but at this time, there were also, again, many Indian Native American tribes being forced into Americanization. Again, very dark times. Besides that, though, with the Kansas-Nebraska, or Nebraska-Kansas Act, now came the time to have the territory being voted on, whether or not, once the state has finally been seceded, will it become either an anti-slave state or a pro-slave state. Before we continue, I made this joke. This is basically how the voting went for Kansas at the time.
No. Yes.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
No.
We were very sure this wouldn't contend. And they said Florida has crazies. Oh, right. Despite the proximity and opposite aims of the settlers, the lid was largely kept on the violence until the election of Kansas territorial legislature on March 30th, 1855. A lot of Missourians who streamed across the border, known as border ruffians, basically were trying to fill the ballot boxes in favor of pro-slavery candidates. And as a result, the pro-slavery candidates prevailed at every polling district except one, the future of Riley County. From 1855 to 1858, Kansas Territory experienced extensive violence and some open battles. This period would be known as Bleeding Kansas, or the Border Wars, by apparently some other people. in these events had caused the major incidents: the Wakarusa War, the sacking of Lawrence, the Potawatomi Massacre, and the Battle of Blackjack. Also the Battle of Osawatomie and the Marais de Cygnes Massacre. Again, forgive me for mispronouncing these things. I don't mean to offend anybody. On December 1st, 1855, a small army of Missourians, acting under the command of Douglas County, Kansas Sheriff Samuel J. Jones, laid siege to the Free State stronghold of Lawrence, and that would later become known as the Wakarusa War. A peace treaty was later at least issued, and thankfully they did accept it. I don't know what was on the treaty. I don't know what it was generally accepted for, but I think both sides knew this was gonna get very big. On May 21st, 1856, pro-slavery forces, led by Sheriff Jones, attacked Lawrence, burning the Free State Hotel to the ground and destroying 2 printing presses and robbing homes. Sad time. The Potawatomi Massacre occurred during the night of May 24th to the morning of May 25th, 1856. In what appears to be a reaction to the sacking of Lawrence, John Brown and a band of abolitionists, some of the members of the Potawatomi Rifles, killed 5 settlers, thought to be pro-slaverers, north of the Potawatomi Creek in Franklin County, Kansas. Also, if some of y'all are curious who John Brown is, he was a pro-abolitionist. He tried to become a lawyer, later down the line became crazy and just went like, oh, you know what, peace was never an option, and then fired at any slavery dude he could find. Besides that, John Brown may have been crazy, but damn, he's a national hero to our means, even if he was born in Connecticut. Aside from that, John did go into hiding. I'm very sure he didn't cause any other major destructions happening around it. Oh, holy shit. Besides that, territorial constitutions were later introduced and then made to at least secede the violently feud against the pro-slavery and anti-slavery factions. Basically, all that happened was 4 constitutions were made. The first one was no slaves, but then the Southern Senates cried like babies about it, which is called the Topeka Constitution. The other one was yes slaves, with Congress being, if it ain't for the will of the people, then it ain't for me, which is called the Lecompton one. Lecompton. Leavenworth was just no slaves and lets up women's rights, even though we're under Lecompton's constitution. And the Wyandotte, which was, look, screw you, we're staying free in Kansas. We at least had our heart in the matter somewhere. Besides that, by the time the Wyandotte Constitution was adopted in October 1859, it was clear that the pro-slavery forces had lost control of Kansas. With this dawning realization, and the departure of John Brown from the state, Bleeding Kansas's violence virtually ended. The new issue was John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, a national event later that month. Kansas, soon becoming the 34th state, admitted to the Union on January 29, 1861, and in the 1860s saw several important developments in the history of Kansas, including participation in the Civil War, the beginning of cattle drives, the roots of Prohibition in Kansas, and the start of the Indian Wars on the Western Plains. Cannot escape the Native Americans here. Most people don't even know that the Civil War basically kind of started with Kansas. Not because the state was already made and issued, because some southern state decided to shoot a cannon into a certain area, and that was basically provoking the Union, going like, alright, bet. But aside from such, at the start of the war in April 1861, the Kansas government had pretty much no well-organized militia. No arms, equipments, or supplies. Nothing in which to meet the demands, except the united will of officials and citizens. You could always look up how many of us went to war, but in my notes it basically stated about 24,000 of us were already ready to go to war. Apart from the small formal battles, there were 29 Confederate raids into Kansas during the war. The most serious episode came when Lawrence, Kansas came under attack on August 21st, 1863 by guerrillas led by William Clark Quantrill. And we're talking about guerrilla warfare here. Either way, poor Lawrence can't catch a damn break. After the Union, General Thomas Irving Jr. ordered the imprisonment of women who had provided aid to Confederate guerrillas. Tragically, the jail's roof collapsed, killing 5. These deaths enraged guerrillas in Missouri, and on August 21st, 1863, William Quantrill led Quantrill's raid into Lawrence, burned much of the city, and killed over 150 unarmed men and boys. In addition to the jail's collapse, Quantrill also rationalized the attack on the Citadel of Abolition would bring revenge for many wrongs, real or imagined, that the Southerners had suffered at the hands of Jayhawkers. The Battle of Baxter Springs, sometimes called the Baxter Springs Massacre, was a minor battle in the war, fought on October 6, 1863, near the modern-day town of Baxter Springs, Kansas. Aside from that, on October 25th, 1864, the Murray de Signa, forgive me again for mispronouncing it, occurred in Lynn County, Kansas. This battle of trading post was between Major General Sterling Price and Union forces under Major General Alfred Pleasington. Prince, being a coward after running away after a certain battle that had won, had been pushed out of the Union forces. Fort Leonard, central Kansas, was established in 1859 as a base of military operations against hostile Indians of the Central Plains to protect traffic along the Santa Fe Trail, and after 1861 became an agency for the administration of the Central Plains Indians by the Bureau of Indian Affairs under the terms of the Fort Wise Treaty of 1861. Besides the war coming to an end and the North beating the South, came Kansas Pacific railroads. A lot of them were planned to be built, but not all of them were actually built. It was basically due to some dried up funding in 1873. But aside from such, we were trying to make our way through, trying to have ourselves a bunch of railroads built in order to get from town to town and have supplies be delivered more thoroughly and more efficiently than just by cattle wagon. Besides the Civil War, the railroads did not reach the main cattle ranching areas in Texas, so cowboys brought cattle to Kansas railheads. Initially, this was via the Santa Fe Trail. Aside from such, we had ourselves a new sheriff in town. Wild Bill Hitchcock became Marshal of Albanine, Kansas. There he had himself one hell of a fight between John Wesley Hardin, which resulted the latter fleeing the town after Wild Bill managed to disarm him. Aside from that, the Dalton Gang robbed trains and banks throughout Kansas and the Southwest and maintained a hideout in Madey, Colorado. It was involved in the bloodiest county seat fights in the history of American West. The shootout on February 27, 1887, with boosters, some would say hired gunmen, from nearby Leoti, left several people dead and wounded. I just simply want to state that our prohibition mainly started because of an old lady who went bar to bar, wielding a hatchet and axe, smashing the entire place down. And all I can simply say is that if an old lady with an axe convinced us to go into prohibition, who the hell else knows what would have happened if the police actually kept her in a cell? On February 19, 1881, Kansas became the first state to amend its constitution to prohibit all alcohol beverages. This action has spawned by the temperance movement and was enforced by axe-toting Carry A Nation, beginning in 1888, which I stated again before. Crazy lady wielding an axe, the cops did not throw away the key. Aside from that, though, surprisingly, after 1890's prohibition was joined with progressivism to create a reform movement that elected 4 successive governors between 1905 to 1919, they favored extreme prohibition enforcement policies and claimed Kansas was truly dry. However, they did not repeal prohibition public bars, a restriction which was not lifted until, get this, 1987. We didn't allow retail liquor sales on Sunday until 2005. By the alcohol laws of Kansas, today 29 counties are dry counties. Also, before I end this prohibition note, I do have this tab on farming, but it's very long, so I'm just going to state this. Ironic for Kansas having the most farmland, most amount of farmers, I'm guessing here, and most amount of wheat or things grown, and yet we had the most difficult time trying to grow a fecking carrot. During 1925, the Kansas flag had finally been designed. It was officially adopted by the Kansas State Legislature in 1927, however, and modified in 1961. If you're curious, the word Kansas was added below the seal in gold block lettering. Aside from the Great Depression that later came after, 1930, it's really hard to say what Kansas had really gone through, minus the fact that farming had to be, changed into, hey, forget carrots, grow wheat.
Okay.
Of course, however, though, after the Dust Bowl came World War II, which again is hard to say what really did go on or happen throughout that time. Many men or women tried to enroll, and many farmers were kind of worried about prices going up, mainly on their own farmland and such. Aside from that, though, young farmers were deferred from the draft. Wichita had long shown interest in a variation, became a major manufacturing center for the aircraft industry during the war, attracting tens of thousands of underemployed workers from the farms and small towns of the state. Basically meaning we had a lot of aircraft carriers being built and a lot of aircraft war things going on, meaning we probably also helped with the invention of the airplane. And I'm not talking about just the simple, I'm talking about the
Passengers, please sit down as I then describe how to put your seatbelt on.
Aside from that, the Women's Land Army of America was a wartime women's labor pool organized in the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It didn't really bring in a lot of women from the town or city life, but it succeeded in training several hundred farm wives in machine handling, safety, proper clothing, time sewing methods, and nutrition. Gotta figure out how to eat a carrot. The Cold War really wasn't too much for us during the time in Kansas. We basically did, however, have the Supreme Court in the Brown versus Board of Education unanimously declared that separate education facilities are inherently unequal and as such violate the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which guarantees all citizens equal protection of the law. Basically meaning, hey, all races are going to go into schools together. Deal with it. Aside from that, during the 1950s and 60s, intercontinental ballistic missiles designed to carry a single nuclear warhead were stationed throughout Kansas facilities. It's a great thing to know so far. And on June 8th, 1966, Topeka, Kansas was struck by an F5 rated tornado. According to the Fujita scale, the 1966 Topeka tornado started on the southwest side of town, moving northeast, hitting various landmarks, including Washburn University. Total dollar cost was put at $100 million. This tornado did a lot more damage than a bad fashion show. I can't think of a joke for this one. The only thing that basically happened after the 1980s in Kansas was in 1993. The Great Flood of 1993 affects several states, including Kansas. And besides that, only 4 things happened in the 21st century, aka coming 2000. In 2006, we did the restoration of the Kansas State House. It begins. In 2007, from May 4th to 6th, the city of Greensburg is destroyed by a tornado. 2013, the restoration of the Kansas State House is completed, and in 2022, a tornado rips through Andover, Kansas. I know I don't mention much about tornadoes, but we really are known for tornadoes, and it's a little stupid. But in the end of all that type of history, I at least hope that you got to learn something more about my current state. Now let's go on and move on with the fun facts, because this is gonna get interesting. Now, this person may not be much to your eyes, but old President Dwight D. Eisenhower was actually a home resident of Kansas, in Albany. Kind of wish he was born, though. But I mean, hey, we helped him grow up, so hey, we did something right. Aside from such, we also have presidential candidates Bob Dole and Alf Landon, and the aviator Amelia Earhart. And if you don't know what that means, basically pilot female who could fly. Aside from such, we also have our famous silent comedian Buster Keaton, who was born in Pequea, Kansas. I know some of you may not know who he is, but I do. And I hope one day that I will have the straightest face as he does when he freaking makes things. Aside from such, when this video was posted, Kansas is finally 162 years old. Our capital is Topeka. Our motto, Ad Astra per Aspera, which means to the stars through difficulties. Our state song is Home on the Range. And right now, our flag is rich Kansas farmland, a farmer plowing covered wagons, Native Americans hunting bison, and a rising sun with a steamboat representing commerce on the water under the sun, and mountains with 34 stars around the picture. And underneath it, in gold block lettering, Kansas. Our state flower is the sunflower. Our state bird is the western meadowlark. Our state animal is the buffalo. Surprisingly, we also have a state amphibian, which is the beard, tiger, salamander. Our state fish is the channel catfish. And our state reptile is the box turtle. Not to also forget to mention that in 1937, we have agreed that our state tree is the cottonwood. The 4 states that border us are to our right, Missouri, to the top of us, Nebraska, the bottom of us, Oklahoma, and to our left, Colorado. As of today, every time January 29th comes around, it is officially Kansas Day. And I will always celebrate it, love it, and favor it. Aside from such, we have the world's largest ball of twine in Cawker City. That's a weird fact for you. We are also nicknamed the Jayhawkers, Midway, and the Wheat State. As I had looked up, if you're curious how Kansas has gotten its name, we were named from the Kansas Indians in the Kansas River. Kansa, meaning people of the South Wind. The South was in parentheses, mainly people of the wind. Aside from such, we do have many nicknames, most of us being called Kansans. Others like to be called Jayhawkers or Sunflowers. Grasshoppers is a surprising one, because grasshoppers led us into a famine because they ate our crops. It's pretty morbid. We also do have ourselves a state slogan, Kansas, as big as you think, formerly simply wonderful. Formerly was also in parentheses. It's basically Kansas as big as you think, simply wonderful. Aside from such, we are the only state to have won over 2,000 basketball games. We won the most beautiful license plate in 1981 for just a wheat field. At one time, we did have a law, for it was illegal to put ice cream on cherry pie. Dumb as shite. Aside from such, you can thank us here. Pizza Hut first opened their store in Wichita, Kansas. Also White Castle, too. Honestly, I never had White Castle. Still never found one in Kansas. In 1998, Topeka's mayor renamed Topeka to Topekachu in celebration of Pokemon. Kansas has a famous clown, Emmett Leo Kelly. Topeka has 2 names of an unknown Indian tribe, either Smoky Hill or a good place to dig potatoes. Very random. For those of you who want to know anything about any women's rights being up and annied, Kansas elected the first ever female mayor in 1887, and she was the first woman to become mayor in U.S. history. This was in Argonia, Kansas. We've also had a few people in our office. Charles Curtis was the only Native American to ever serve as Vice President of the United States, and he was born in Topeka. He served under President Herbert Hoover from 1928 to 1932. To those of you who have been curious why I said Kansas has been mostly made up of farmland, that is because Kansas is made up of 88% farmland. Let that sink in. Aside from such, Kansas is famous for the opening setting of The Wizard of Oz, and an exact replica of Dorothy's home can be visited today. Kansas was the first state to ratify the 15th Amendment, which gave African American men the right to vote. Kansas, while mostly flat, has the highest point of 4,039 feet above sea level. It is known as Mount Sunflower. The graham cracker was also named after Kansas minister Reverend Sylvester Graham, who preferred whole wheat flour crackers. Kansas is also home to 26 state parks. As a major industry include agriculture, car manufacturing, and the aircraft industry. It is home to the windiest city in the United States, being Dodge City, where winds average at 14 miles per hour. And last but not least, Kansas's Smith County sits at the geographical center of the United States. Man, we surely did learn a lot today about Kansas. And though it may have sounded like I was rushing through, I could gladly admit I had over about 50 pages ready to tell you everything. But if I did, I knew most of you would have been bored and clicked off this video. Aside from such, I at least hope that I helped you learn something about American history and or more about Kansas. I hope you all have a great day, and I'll catch you smooth skins on the flip side. Have yourselves a good one now.
At night, while the heavens are bright, from the